Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Climate Coordination RCAST. There's lots to discuss today, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I have a couple of happier stories. Well, one of them that's quite inspirational, and another that's sort of a continuation of what we were discussing last week. But the first one is not so happy, and I'm not sure how this slipped past my notice because this is from November 30th. So it's about a week and a half old now. But this is a story from CNN. I'm sure you can find it lots of other places. Talking about how rain fell at Greenland's summit this year for the first time in recorded history. And when I saw this, I exclaimed a curse, an exclamation that involves a curse word. I probably shouldn't say on the podcast, but when I saw the headline, I thought, uh-oh, this is not good. But it's just interesting to me that these things are happening and they're not really making the mainstream news. I mean, I even look for this stuff every week, actively, and I still didn't even see this until a week and a half later. So anyway, I'm just going to read a bit from this because I just want people to know, and I think it's fascinating. I think it's terrifying. I just think it's important. So here we go. Rain fell on the summit of Greenland instead of snow for the first time on record in August, as the Northern Hemisphere experienced warmer than usual summer temperatures. I just also want to say Greenland is icy and Iceland is green, just for people who think this is normal. It's not normal. A new study suggests that it's likely to be the norm for just 4 or 5 decades, in just 4 or 5 decades. So it's already happening now. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's probably not going to take 4 decades for it to become normal, but that's fine if they want to write that. I think that's funny. The Arctic is expected to experience more rain than snow sometime between 2060 and 2070, marking a major transition in its precipitation patterns as the climate crisis jacks up temperatures in the region. So that's terrifying. It's going to rain more than it's going to snow in the Arctic. So that's what we're doing now. That's what's happening. New climate modeling shows the transition could happen earlier than scientists had previously projected. It's exactly what I said, because this is always how it is. Marshal McLuhan, the lead author of the study and climate researcher at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, told CNN that earlier modeling suggested it wouldn't occur until between 2090 and 2100. But okay, so now they're bringing it back to, next 40 years. So that's interesting. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention here. The study notes that the increase in rainfall is due in large part to the loss of sea ice. More open water and warmer air temperatures mean more evaporation, which primes the atmosphere for a wetter Arctic. The researchers say a rainfall-dominated Arctic has the potential to destabilize Greenland's ice sheet, triggering a global rise in sea level. So that'll be charming. That'll be really, really charming. Things that happen in the Arctic don't specifically stay in the Arctic. I think that's a very important thing to remember. But yeah, so that rise in temperature creates a lot more evaporation, not just in the Arctic, but all over the oceans, all over the world. That's one of the reasons why the hurricanes are stronger, because there's more moisture in the air. So there's just more stuff being whipped around in the storm. Let's see. Then there's a little bit more about greenhouse gas emissions and so on and so forth. And then I guess I'll just end with this little piece about the water. It says scientists have concluded that the burning of fossil fuels led to Greenland melting over the past 2 decades. A recent study published in the journal Cryosphere found Earth has lost a staggering 28 trillion tons of ice since the mid 1990s, which is a staggeringly huge number. 28 trillion tons is a lot, a large portion of which was from the Arctic, including the Greenland ice sheet. So that's all going into our oceans, and it's making our storms stronger, and it's going to make the sea level rise. And I think that's going to be just massively accelerated when we see more rain than snow. So that's the that's the bad news. I'll pause there.
Yeah, it's just bearing fruit, like we're seeing it in our, continuously shocking weather reports. I'm certainly feeling it here where I live, and it's all directly related to the warming of the Arctic and the disruption of our weather patterns. So it's not something that is going to happen. It's happening right now. And this article kind of highlights the speed at which it's happening. That's kind of, shocking even experts who study the stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting when you learn about this stuff that the Arctic, whatever is happening toward the equator is happening at the Arctic like 10 times faster. I'm not sure exactly what is the reason for that, but the rate at which we experience change in lower latitudes is nothing compared to what's going on at the Arctic. So that's another thing to bear in mind for people who might not know. But yeah, I've got to say, rain in the Arctic doesn't sound too great, but here we go. Let's do it. I think we need to prepare for a huge amount of sea level rise. I mean, if you bought a house in the next 10 years, this sea level rise from this increased rain would totally affect your mortgage if you lived anywhere near a coast, I think. And sea level rise is already affecting people that have mortgages now. But I think this is really going to put a wrench in a lot of people's planning. We think of the East Coast of America as usually the place that is struggling from the sea level rise. The West Coast doesn't quite have the same situation with sea level rise. But I wonder if that's going to change, because it becomes so severe that now even the people on the West Coast have to worry about it. I'm curious when that is going to be noticed, but very interesting situation we have here. Let's move on to something a little bit happier, which is not totally happy because the need for it is very unhappy. But I read this and I thought it was so uplifting, and I just love the idea. So here's the next story. This is from a publication called Hyperallergic, which I believe is an art publication, kind of an art blog. And I don't want to, say necessarily that this is news because it's more art, but also it's art news. So that's fine. This is from a few days ago. It says in Ethiopia, artists protect the environment through, quote, plant graffiti, which I think is just sounds wonderful. Plant graffiti sounds amazing. researchers and artists are working to restore biodiversity in Kofele, Ethiopia, through a 50-meter tree nursery in the shape of a lion that will be visible from outer space. And they even drew up this conceptual sketch of it. There's this project from ROBA, ROBA, which is Rural Organization for Betterment of Agro-Pastoralists. And they have shared this Trees for Life project, a picture of what it's going to be like. And it says, 2 years ago, on a trip to visit family, Jamal Waco observed snowfall for the first time in his hometown of Kofele. As a diaspora Ethiopian now living in Vancouver, Waco couldn't believe his eyes. The tropical environment of his youth appeared radically altered, proving that climate change had made its mark on the region. So he goes on to say that people in Ethiopia don't necessarily know what climate is. They're not prepared. This guy works for ROBA to restore biodiversity through this tree nursery, which is a part of a Trees for Life project, which is basically trying to restore the plant life in and around Ethiopia and beyond. And here is why they're doing this. As Ethiopia's national animal, the lion represents not just cultural pride, but the ecosystem's ability to support the large predators. In the last century, the East African country has lost 90% of its forests, leading to species endangerment and widespread poverty. For native Oromo people, to whom trees provide food, fire, and shelter, the practice of tree planting was once central to the democratic system of Oromo self-governance called GADA, which is GADAA. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing any of this, which predates today's federal republic. ROBA founder and director Hussein Wata told Hyperallergic over WhatsApp that GADA has always been about protecting the land and celebrating Oromo self-determination. So this is an amazing project. It says using only hand tools, more than 5,000 ROBA workers have planted 4.2 million trees since 1995, with a diverse array of saplings for fuel, animal feed, and medicine. Since late October, ROBA workers endured extreme heat and torrential rains to begin planting the 10,000 saplings that comprise the lion, which is situated in a Kofele schoolyard. In addition to the lion, ROBA is planting trees in circle formations and in the outline of medicinal Cordia africana saplings. Inspired young Romos from other districts and expressed their interest in plant graffiti of their own. So basically, this is an idea that is spreading around, which I think is so cool. And I hope that the trees can survive, because I know that there's a huge problem of drought sometimes, and there's a huge problem of flooding sometimes in different regions. So I'm just hoping that this can all stay and it can thrive and multiply and all that. But I just think it's so cool, this idea of plant graffiti, because it's sort of a way to make a mark on a place, but to make it more beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah, I love that they're planting different types of trees, and I love that they're sort of making art out of it, so that it's not just, I don't know, I feel like it makes it feel like it's more toward a bigger goal when you incorporate art into the process, rather than just planting another tree and another one. When you make it into a piece of art itself, at least it starts out that way. Who knows if it'll be like that in 20 years? You know, it's not Beverly Hills, so I'm sure they're not going to. They're not going to prune it, I hope. I hope they just let it run wild. But I just think it's a nice way to introduce creativity and symbolism into the process, which is just very inspiring.
Oh, speaking of plant growth over 20 years, I just stumbled on this article this morning. Trying to find it here. And it talks about how if we left the rainforests alone, they would restore themselves in 20 years. So destroyed tropical forests could almost fully regrow if humans just leave them alone for 20 years. So that's all we got to do. Leave them alone.
Yeah, a lot of forests I think take a lot longer, but I guess maybe the rainforest is different because it's already so diverse maybe and it gets so much rain, or maybe that climate can just move faster with the growth because there's moisture. I don't know. It's interesting though.
Yeah, I think it definitely grows faster down there. And I think you're right. There's more biodiversity and just, it's more fertile, basically.
Right. Yeah, I read that too. Of course, do you think that we're capable of leaving these tropical forests alone for 20 years?
Well, it would take massive coordination.
Yeah.
Like massive, unprecedented coordination where the industries that are fueling all this destruction of rainforest, which when you look at Brazil, at least, it's because we love to go to McDonald's.
Well, and Bolsonaro doesn't care at all.
Well, this is it. I mean, it's all about the dollar, right? And that.
Yeah, he said in interviews and things that Brazil, that the Amazon belongs to Brazil and it doesn't belong to the world. And since I guess the implication there is that he's the leader of Brazil, therefore it belongs to him.
Right.
Which is totally sociopathic.
Yeah, so that's basically the kind of coordination problem we have, right? It's we have a long way to go for humanity to hit that phase shift that Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about, for us to kind of begin to even imagine the idea of coordinating as an entire self-aware creature. So
yeah, but it is encouraging that it doesn't take a whole lifetime, the regrowth, at least in some places.
Yeah, it's encouraging for whatever creature comes after us, I guess.
Yeah, and that reminds me of what was that film? It's one of the David Attenborough films. I think it's called A Life on Our Planet, but he's done a lot of films, so it's one of his most recent ones. I think I watched it on Netflix, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he starts and ends one of his films in Chernobyl, which has been completely abandoned for years, and I'm not exactly sure how long ago that was, maybe decades ago, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he starts and ends Chernobyl with amazing footage of deer running through, old school buildings, and the whole Chernobyl is completely overrun with nature. And it's very sort of dystopic and strange, but it's also incredibly beautiful and sort of a reminder of the power of nature to transcend destruction, and what human beings sort of see as permanent is not necessarily what is truly permanent in the end, sort of a nature will out view. So I highly recommend anybody to Google what Chernobyl looks like now. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I think he was saying he was showing those scenes not to say, hey, let's have a bunch of disasters all over the place, but to say, look at how strong nature is if we just leave it alone. So
yeah, that was quite a few years ago, wasn't it? That documentary. I seem to remember seeing it like at least a decade ago or more.
Oh, no.
Oh.
The one I'm talking about, I think, is more recent. I think it was just about
Okay.
a year or two old, but
Okay.
he's done movies his whole life. So I'm sure that maybe he's touched on this before, or you saw a different one, but let's see. I want to see if I can find, Chernobyl. Yeah, I think we can, oh yeah, there's lots of sources on this. So if you go to YouTube and you just look at Chernobyl now, you can find a lot of different videos that will take you through So I think that's really fascinating and sort of speaks to what you were saying anyway about the rainforest.
Yeah, the only problem is that you need an atmosphere for nature to do its work. You need a
Right.
workable atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing about planting all these trees in Africa, which is, amazing. But it's like, can the trees survive? It's all good and well to say, okay, let's plant more trees and the people will eat what comes from the trees. Okay. But what if the trees can't live there anymore? Then what are you going to do? So, these environmental projects, they require some level of climate stability to work.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we screw that up, then I don't know what's going to happen, but yeah. Okay. Well, here's one more. This is the one that relates to what we were discussing last week about the mapping of the fungal networks, all the different mushrooms and beyond that are a massive carbon sink, but are also have been evolving for billions of years. And I just wanted to share this because I love this term. This is from BBC, and it's called the Wood Wide Web. And I thought that was so cute. The Wood Wide Web. Scientists to map hotspots of fungal life. So I'll just read a little bit from this because it's sort of a continuation of what we were talking about last week, but I just love the term Wood Wide Web. I just think it's so great. I don't know why. So this is the Wood Wide Web is an underground network of plant roots and fungi that, among other things, allows trees to share nutrients with each other. Scientists say that this underground conversation has been long overlooked. The initiative to map and preserve the Earth's underground fungal networks is led by the Society for the Production of Underground Networks, SPUN, or SPUN, which we already talked about. This is the start of an underground climate movement to protect this ancient life support system. Local experts, they're calling themselves myconauts. For I guess it's mycelia astronaut, maybe. Myconauts. After mycology, the study of fungi, will collect 10,000 samples over the next 18 months to compile a global map of fungal hotspots. And machine learning will be used to build up a picture of the function of fungal networks and their role as carbon sinks, something that absorbs more carbon-containing compounds, such as carbon dioxide, than it releases. So a sink basically is just like a sponge. Fungi are the invisible ecosystem engineers, and their loss is totally undocumented. Soils are home to 25% of all species on Earth, yet current plans to conserve biodiversity of the soils of these hotspots above ground fail to protect over 50% of biodiversity below ground. So if you like the term underground, then you're going to love this. And then, of course, it says here the total length of the fungal network in the top 10 centimeters of soil alone is more than 450 quadrillion kilometers, around half the width of our galaxy. So, yeah, we should protect that. The soil is the nutrients in the soil is what creates our food. So if we screw up the soil, we're all going to starve to death incredibly quickly. So, I think this is a really cool project and I can't wait to keep up with it and see what happens. But it seems that scientists and regular people are starting to take a closer look at the intricacies of the life on our planet. And it's more complicated than just, okay, let's plant more trees, which of course we have to do. But it seems that these complicated systems are being looked at and more carefully, and I think that's really good.
Yeah, it's an interesting project for sure.
So Greg should be joining us soon. He said he would be a little bit late, but is there anything, Darryl, that you or Steve would like to discuss before we're joined by Greg?
I guess I just can comment on my recent trip to Miami Beach. So last week I was in Miami Beach, and it's a a coastal city, and they're experiencing the repercussions of climate change. And I just looked up one of the statistics that since the 1950s, the sea level rise has risen 8 inches in Miami Beach. So, they're very concerned about sea level rise, and if we don't reverse course, Miami Beach may be underwater someday. So and this Miami Beach is hosting, along with the Aspen Institute, a climate change conference in the first week of March. So you can Google the Aspen Institute Climate Change Conference to get more information on that. And that's what I want to mention.
Thank you. Wow, 8 inches sounds like a lot.
Yeah, it's
That's more than I actually thought.
yeah, and I just went online to verify that just a moment ago. So that's hopefully, it all depends on the source of information, but just my quick Google is what I came back with. I heard some other numbers, so some numbers I heard from others didn't seem quite right. So hopefully that information is relatively accurate.
Yeah, that kind of connects with this article that my partner sent me this week. The headline is "A New Ratings Industry is Emerging to Help Homebuyers Assess Climate Risks." So it is now officially entered the realm of real estate assessment. Where you move to, you will now, whenever you choose a new location to live, you will now potentially consult this data that will, give you an idea of, whether you should be moving there or not, and how much, I'm sure it's going to now start to interweave with the insurance industry and real estate values themselves.
Mm-hmm. And along that line, the thought is, it's very expensive to live on Miami Beach. The price of condos and real estate it's very expensive. But if sea level rise keeps increasing, the property values, people aren't going to want to live on Miami Beach. They're going to want to live inland. So it will negatively impact the price of real estate on Miami Beach. So, tools like what you mentioned, Darryl, would probably that would start to appear in the when you factor in climate change for real estate, it starts to you start to recalculate the price of real estate for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised it took that long for it to be added into the sort of general things that are looked at in housing, but I'm not as worried about people who have the money to buy a condo on Miami Beach and people who are financing those places, because they're probably, all their eggs are probably not in that basket, in luxury real estate. But I'm also more worried about people who, regular working class people who might have a home destroyed, and maybe insurance doesn't want to cover it because these climate problems are so common now that a lot of insurance companies might just say we can't accept that.
Very true.
And then what are those people going to do? And just one other thing is, I just think it's so funny. Sometimes you hear people, usually more right-wing people, say, well, if you don't, like the climate where you are, then just sell your house, like just move. And of course, yeah, any regular working class person should have the wherewithal to move. But who's going to buy a house that's, has a, extremely high risk of fire or flood or something else, or hurricane or whatever? Who in their right mind is going to buy that asset? So it's I just think it's so oh yeah, please buy my house. I can't live here because it's going to flood.
Right. But you can live in my house.
But yeah, can you give me 1.5 million for this house?
Yeah. It's kind of like playing hot potato,
Exactly. And so, I just think it's funny that people always say, oh, it's so simple, just move. And it's no, you have to find someone who's going to buy that asset.
Right.
So I just, want that to be factored into the equation. I feel bad for, maybe real estate developers. Like, I'm sure a lot of them worked very hard on these, beachfront properties. I'm not saying that their loss is not a real loss, but you've got farmers and people in the Midwest and, people all over the place, like people in Texas and Louisiana and all over the place who don't have the money or the connections or whatever to be able to move or to evacuate. And so, that's going to put a wrench into things, which it already has.
Well, when you think about the whole idea that most people, vast majority of people in North America look at real estate as their main, sometimes only investment for the future. It's the one thing that always goes up. And it's encouraged by, every single financial advisor out there to get your money into real estate. It's where it's going to go. Most people, working class people, look at it as their source for retirement and for their children. It's the number one way to invest. And it's now we're entering a period of buy high and sell low in certain areas of the world due to climate change.
Yeah, I'm worried about thinking about where to buy a house. A lot of millennials don't want to do it. Not because it's so expensive. Of course it's so expensive, but it's like, you don't want to work your whole life, to own a house if it's just going to get destroyed immediately. So I think we're going to see some generational tension here too. I'm just like, who is going to buy a house? It's like 30 years from now, who is going to buy a house? Or even 20 years from now. I mean, I would love to buy a house, but I just worry that I'm not going to be able to find one that I feel safe in long term, given how much they cost. Like, the risk just doesn't really outweigh itself to me, unless I did it in a specific area, But then finding those areas is also very tricky. So I think there's going to be a huge surplus of houses 30 years from now, or 20 years from now, even if I had to guess. I know we're kind of in a housing shortage, but I don't think that's going to last.
I don't know. The way people live is going to have to change. It's seriously a real elephant, in the room. It was the cause of the financial crisis in 2008.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and what Steve was saying about the hot potato thing, like, somebody's got to be left holding the bag. If we're going to be talking about, a world economy where the vast majority of people are renting, nobody wants to buy homes, so everybody is renting. Well, then the homes are either going to have no insurance, or they're going to be there. All the insurance companies, and like even the federal insurance, the flooding program for the federal flooding insurance, I don't know what it's called, but even they are like billions of dollars in debt already. So, I mean, we might be looking at a situation where the idea of insurance changes radically because there are just so many claims that they just can't afford to do it. So I think it's going to be interesting.
Yep. I have this article, completely unrelated, from the Dallas Morning News, that's entitled "How Social Media is Changing Our Brains," with the subtitle, "As social media becomes central to our daily communication, we need to understand how it affects us." And there's one section here I'll read. The influence of algorithms. Social media platforms adapt to the information a user gives them. Unlike a text message or a phone call that transmits information largely as it is input, social media platforms have algorithms that govern the content, style, and tone of the platform. Platforms are customized based on what the algorithm thinks a unique user will like and what it thinks that user might buy. All of those platforms change information in ways that range from the subtle to the profound. Zoom might give your face a little airbrushing on your digital calls. Slack shows your coworkers when you're online. Recent reporting about Facebook shows that fear and anger are deliberately built into Facebook's information ecosystem. Intense emotions are shortcut, to activate pathways in the brain. When people are angry, they react. When they are insecure, they look for information or products that can help reduce negative emotions. Anger, conflict, and anxiety are the quickest pathways to holding your brain's attention. And then it gets into a next section, which is called the dark side of the algorithm.
Yeah, it's so interesting when people talk about social media, because even I've heard some people who are part of the co-op say things like this, but I just think it's so interesting that people think the problem is that you're giving up some of your data. You're letting go of something. You're saying, okay, you can have my posts, you can read my posts, or you can know things about my private life. You can know where I go to eat or whatever. But what I don't think people understand is that you're not just giving something out, you're accepting something in, which is the influence of these algorithms.
Yeah, very true.
And so people are like, oh yeah, I'm fine to give up my data. I'm like, okay, are you fine for what they're going to put in your head too? Because you're not just releasing that information. It's not just output from the user to say, okay, you want to know what kind of car I drive. You want to know what music I like. Okay, I'm cool with that. But that's not where it ends. That's only half the deal. They only want that information so that they can they can give you something else. They can sell you something else, or they can nudge you in a certain direction that's profitable for them. Like, that's why they want that. You know what I mean? Like, they don't want to know that you like a certain brand of deodorant or where you would like to spend your summer vacation because it's fun for them. Like, they want it so that they can use that information to alter you, right? To alter your behavior, which is profitable for them. So I just think that's a big piece of it that's missed all the time, is people saying, I don't care who has my data. Okay, you're crazy, but fine. Do you care who is in your head, like changing your opinions and making you think certain things? Because most people are not sophisticated enough to detect these micro changes, especially when it's over time, over months or years. Most people are not savvy enough to say, oh yeah, I started at this place and now I'm here. So anyway, I just want to mention that.
No, it's really good. I'm glad you did. It's true. Like, we have to really look at it as a two-way data transfer, and what's happening in that process. Here in Canada, we have this kind of icon, an intellectual, I guess, media icon named Marshal McLuhan, and he made a famous statement that was, the medium is the message. And when you kind of look at, we go back to television, let's say, when television first appeared, the generation that rose up around television, which was the boomers, the me generation, they were so easy to manipulate. Like, it was like taking candy from a baby. And, because they hadn't experienced this kind of brain manipulation to this degree before. Not to this degree. I mean, it was already happening in other mediums, but television, being able to see and hear moving pictures, that got into your brain like no other medium did. And it really affected that generation. And so we're expanding that capability of influence. And I'm very concerned. I think about this many times a day now. It's on the forefront of my mind. Mark Zuckerberg's plans with Meta. It's really, we, as a culture and a society, if we don't figure this out before that next incredibly compelling brain manipulation platform comes out and becomes mainstreamed, you're going to think of, Facebook's damage to our democratic systems and our ability to accept science so that we can save each other from viruses, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to look at that as minuscule compared to what's going to happen once we all go into the metaverse. So I would call it almost a number one concern of mine these days, because it affects everything, including climate change. And you can invert this and look at what if the algorithms were designed around what if someone like Jim Whitescarver helped design the algorithms, someone who believes and is a pioneer at collective intelligence and how people can actually coordinate with each other to really get amazing results and get actionable items happening. There's another way to look at this. It's not the technology itself that's evil. It's how we've been using it.
Or rather, how it's been using us.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you think about it's not Mark Zuckerberg's fault that he started a company that's based around engineered behavior modification. It's that the structure of profit. I think the problem actually lies in the way that the job of Facebook is to bring in as much profits as quickly as possible for its shareholders. That's its job. And so what it does is it goes for the low-hanging fruit of the human limbic system and attaches it to our fear and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it makes the most amount of money the quickest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem. It's a structural problem connected to how our corporate systems work.
Yeah. I mean, this is why Tristan Harris is such an icon in the space, because he laid it out so clearly and continues to lay it out so clearly.
Mm.
The incentives are all messed up. I mean, I think like this era of human life, like the first like 20 years of 2000, I feel like is like the era of misaligned incentives, or the era of corrupt incentives. Like you see it with environment, you see it in the justice system, you see it in healthcare, like you just see it all over the place, education, social media, where it's like something is not plugged into the right outlet. You know what I mean? Like something got messed up. And if we can get the incentives aligned on a bunch of these different projects, on climate too, I don't know if I said that, climate's a big one as well, then I think the world is going to go into a different direction, a happier direction. And maybe we won't be speeding towards our own imminent collapse anymore.
Yeah, it gets back to Schmachtenberger and humanity's phase shift. We're literally going to have to rapidly evolve to become a different creature. I mean, like, his way of kind of really emphasizing the point is to talk about the process that the metamorphosis process that a butterfly goes through. And kind of he describes it. I think his way of explaining it is kind of a way of kind of going, kind of underlining the kind of huge project we have in front of us. Because he kind of goes, when a caterpillar goes through the metamorphosis process, the first thing it does is he starts to eat rapidly, eat everything around him, just consume everything it possibly can. And then once it gets to the certain bulked up state, it forms a cocoon. And what does it do in the cocoon? It completely turns into liquid. It turns into complete like mush. And then out of that liquid, it reforms into a completely different creature. It's such an incredible example of nature on this planet. And it merges as this thing that can fly. It's kind of insanely amazing.
It's so amazing. Like when you think about, like, say you gave that idea to like somebody in Silicon Valley and said, okay, here's $10 billion. Can you make that? Like, no, they can't do that. Like, they can't do that. Like, they can make like robots that can like make Kool-Aid or whatever. Like, they can't like make butterflies or like make caterpillars that turn into liquid goo and then fly off into the sunset. Like, and by the way, with no waste, no packaging, like.
But I think like Schmachtenberger's point there, when kind of describing the kind of job we have ahead of us, is that humanity has to do that. We have to create a complete phase shift in what we are as a species. It's really, we talk about this kind of stuff so often in this call because we come to this conclusion that, we have to radically change so much about how we coordinate what we are as literally what we are as a species. it's a pretty daunting task.
Well, I'm not looking forward to the goo phase personally, but I'm willing to if it will save us all. But yeah, it's so amazing to look at nature as inspiration for human progression. It's like so
Yeah.
crazy. Like it's so yeah. When you think about the amount of time, like, sometimes when I think about geologic history and I think, okay, like what is a million years? What is a billion years? Whatever. It's like so hard to imagine, like, okay, so what? The sun just went up and down and like that's it? Like, you know what I mean? But then you realize like how all these different things have evolved, and you watch, any nature documentary, and like just the way things have been created, things have evolved is like so staggeringly amazing that you're like, okay, yeah, I do believe that took a million years or longer or whatever,
Well, one lesson I take from the kind of metamorphosis story, as Daniel Schmachtenberger tells it, is that kind of the beginning part of the story where he talks about the first thing that happens, something triggers inside that caterpillar's brain, where all of a sudden it's like, okay, time to eat every friggin' thing in sight. And it starts to just eat and eat and eat voraciously. And it makes me kind of think about, comparing that to humans right now. We're plundering the earth with, we sucked up all these resources from oil and we put it back into the air. These resources that were built, this energy that was stored underground from, ironically, another species that died out. And we're putting it out. It made me think maybe there's like exactly the right amount of oil down there to destroy the atmosphere. And we're like, getting the last dregs of it out to do this. And so, maybe we can look at it as a glass half full thing if we kind of examine, the caterpillar and go, okay, well, maybe that's just part of our process. We go through that, but from that, we can create something beautiful. So I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of a leap, but maybe it's part of the realization process that we have to go through.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that the storytelling phase is kind of important. Whatever, like having narratives that support, each of us getting through our day, getting through our year, getting through our decade, getting through our lives. The stories that we tell are very important. Who knows how true they are, but they certainly have an impact, right? I mean, the stories that we told ourselves in the 60s are very different than the stories that we tell now.
Yeah.
I often think that, there was a soundtrack for the 60s. It was clear, right? There was a kind of musical revolution that went along with the sociological revolution. And I feel like we need to be more conscious and deliberate to, both about our storytelling, but also about our musicking, if we want to get through this with something that is humanity intact. I think we want to be a lot more deliberate, not only about the stories, but also about the soundtrack that we create to help us get through this passage.
Yeah, I think music, we were talking about this before, music is definitely a key part of the solution.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you with us, Greg. Is there anything that you wanted to share on the call today?
Let's see. Well, it's interesting, talking about music, when I was participating in the Foresight Vision Weekend this past weekend, Alison and Mark Miller, Alison Dutman and Mark Miller created wrote a book that's all about sort of intelligent cooperation, intelligent coordination, and for all the things that they looked at, I mean, they go pretty far afield, including, the threats from artificial general intelligence and a lot of other things. They don't look at music, and yet the power of music as a coordination of humanity is undeniable, right? I mean, it doesn't take even 2 seconds to reflect and go, oh wow, well, look at, you know, city symphonies, look at rock bands, and everything in between. These are, you know, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people are organized by music. Just, you know, imagine your favorite movie and you keep the soundtrack, but you get rid of or you keep the dialogue, but you get rid of the soundtrack. Right? What happens to your experience of that movie? It's not even the same movie anymore. So music as a real and objective coordinating force for humanity is, you know, clear, but we're not thinking about how to tap into it to help us get to where we need to go. You know, to cross from a pupa to a butterfly, right? So,
I love that you mentioned that about the film music, because the other way around it works. If you just listen to the soundtrack, in fact, there's whole concerts dedicated to just the soundtrack with no image.
Absolutely.
But you really can't have the image with no soundtrack.
Well, it's a completely different experience. You can have it, but it just doesn't have the same impact, right? Yeah, it's missing something.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say that you know, the idea of the coordinating power of music. I think of like the world we live in right now, in regards to that, as kind of being handcuffed. You know, music has its hands handcuffed behind its back right now, and the reason for that is because of how the music industry has evolved over the years. And it's evolved over the years such that it was 5, now it's 3 major companies in the world are your curators. And that's how they built their empire, is to make sure that they are the ones that decide who the bulk of the people listen to. And so it's important for them, because they've grown up as an industry that is the controller of curation. It's been fascinating for me to observe them do that in the streaming realm. And so what's happened is there's actually a big gap in the marketplace right now. And the gap in the marketplace is for a music streaming service that provides social networking, so that the people who love the music speak to each other, communicate with each other, and become the curators. We have to take that curation back. And that, to me, is the solution for right now, to bring the power of music back into society.
Yeah,
that was my Amano pitch.
Well, I definitely believe that something like that is true. I just think we also need to remember that something from the punk movement and from things much earlier than that, which is that we're the ones that make music. You don't have to have all kinds of production. You don't have to have all kinds of glam. You know, you just have to have the ability to, you know, clap your hands together or sing or shout. A musician can make music with anything. Right?
Yes.
And every 3-year-old child is a master musician. They already know this thing, which is that they can make music with anything.
This is why Bobby McFerrin is so popular, because he taps into that basic ability of everyone.
Yes, exactly. And so and this is what part of, you know, as when you think about decentralization, decentralization with respect to music is literally just remembering that you could always make music with whatever you had to hand. And I think that's the same in terms of getting through this transition. We can always be human with whatever we have to hand. We don't have to be enslaved.
Did Greg just cut out for you guys?
Yeah, he said we don't have to be enslaved.
We gotta head over to the staff meeting.
Thank you so much for a wonderful discussion, and we will continue it next week. Thank you so much, everyone.